Arifa.
Hello guys, I'm Arif Farhan.
Hi, I'm Azwin.
We are
Emissions.
Kerajaan memutuskan untuk melaksanakan Perintah Kawalan Pergerakan mulai 18 Mac 2020 iaitu lusa hingga 31 Mac 2020 di seluruh negara. Perintah kawalan ini dibuat di bawah Akta Pencegahan dan Pengawalan Penyakit Berjangkit 1988 dan Akta Polis 1967.
Today, we are going to explain about the evolution of quarantine. What is quarantine? Quarantine separates and restricts the movement of people who are exposed to a contagious disease. It is happening right now in Malaysia since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic. There are 6 policies that were implemented by the government, which are MCO, CMCO, RMCO, EMCO, TEMCO, and AEMCO. The implementation of these policies is divided into 8 phases. Let's take a further look. Let me begin by explaining about Phase 1 and then I'll move on to the Phase 2 of the Movement Control Order. Phase 1! Phase 1 of the MCO began on the 18th March 2020 and was to end on the 31st March 2020. On the 16th of March 2020 at 10 p.m. Malaysian time, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, gave a live speech on television officially declaring a movement control order under the Prevention and Control of Infectious Diseases Act 1988 and the Police Act 1967. Due to the rapid increase in positive COVID-19 cases and difficulty in tracing the patient's contacts, the Government of Malaysia has imposed the Movement Control Order on the 18th of March 2020. The MCO was to be carried out in different phases in hopes of curbing the spread of COVID-19 in Malaysia. Following the implementation of the MCO, all Malaysians were instructed primarily to stay indoors. Other restrictions imposed were prohibition of mass gatherings, health screening and quarantine for Malaysians coming in from abroad, restriction on foreigners entering the country, and closure of all facilities except primary and essential services such as health services, water, electricity, telecommunication, and food supply companies. Everyone was advised to make purchases through online platforms. COVID-19 has certainly revolutionized our way of life. It has made our old abnormal into our new norm. It is not surprising that these new norms will become the routine in the future. Brace yourselves, as more changes are to head our way during this pandemic. This reminds me back in the days when we used to go outside without worrying about a thing and not having to wear a mask. Now, Emissioners, let me briefly explain Phase 1 of the MCO. Phase 1 of the MCO was believed to have further impeded the spread of COVID-19. Upon the increase of positive COVID-19 cases, the number of suspected patients continued to rise. Controlling the spread of COVID-19 became an uphill battle for authorities and frontline workers despite the many efforts to instill awareness and practice preventive measures. Gradually, more Malaysians began adhering to the MCO regulations, taking more proactive steps to ensure they remain safe, consequently flattening the curve. Next, the second phase of the MCO was from 1st April until 14th April 2020. Consequently, Malaysians were once again told to remain at home and practice social distancing to prevent the spread of the deadly pandemic. The second phase of MCO included a more strict and enhanced regulations such as shorter business operating hours and ensuring major public cleaning and disinfection processes were carried out around the country. Roadblocks will be set up and monitoring the movement of people will be increased. Plus, Defence Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob announced on 30th March that operating hours for eateries and supermarkets as well as delivery services will be restricted during the second phase of MCO, which took effect on 1st April from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Movement of vehicles will also be restricted, while private vehicles, including e-hauling and taxis, are allowed to operate only between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. Operations of public transport services, however, remain from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. To reduce the risk of transmission, on March 22nd, the military had been deployed to help enforce movement restrictions. The restrictions include prohibiting Malaysian citizens from leaving the country, discouraging non-essential domestic travel, closing all schools and non-essential government services and businesses.
Thank you, Farisha. Let's move on to Phase 3. It started from 15 until 28 April 2020. The government had reinforced the law detaining lawbreakers on the double to face legal action, resulting in compound of up to 1,000 ringgit or a jail sentence of up to 2 years under Section 24 of the Prevention and Control of Infectious Diseases Act 1988 Act 342. Phase 3 also involved the government concentrating gradual effort in reviving the economy. Upon consultation with the relevant authorities, more businesses will operate alongside an expanded list of businesses deemed essential services, namely automotive, machinery, and construction sites, all in line with strict requirements to adhere with specific standard operating procedures. What happened to all the schools? How are they going to learn now? Well, this is the first phase that the government has instructed all the schools to do home-based learning, as we call it online distance learning, known as ODL, until it reopens. Let's move on to Phase 4. It was extended by another 2 weeks, which was 29 April to 12 May 2020. This is where the government allowed students in hostel to return home using Standard Operation Procedure, known as SOP. Let's watch a clip about their experience returning to their home for the first time since the pandemic happened. Roll the clip!
Perasaan saya kalau dapat balik ni sangat happy.
Kami boleh menyambut bulan Ramadan bersama keluarga masing-masing.
Alhamdulillah happy sebab dapat buka puasa dengan family, dapat bersama dengan family.
Rasa macam dah rasa family dah.
Ada sedikit rasa sedih lah sebenarnya sebab apabila dah kami menjalani tempoh PKP dekat kolej ni dalam tempoh yang agak lama, so kami dah rasa macam satu sebuah keluarga yang sangat besar.
Sepanjang kami berada dalam kampus ni, Alhamdulillah pihak SCP dan MBP juga mengadakan beberapa program yang memberi manfaat kepada kami juga supaya kami tak bosan berada dalam kolej.
Pihak polis selalu ambil perat.
Yang bestnya waktu macam ni lah, kita dapat makanan, dapat makan free, terima bantuan, internet free.
Pengalaman kami di sini sangat-sangat bermakna kerana kebajikan kami sangat kita jaga.
Dari makan minum sehinggalah kesihatan mental kami.
Experience saya sangat bagus. Saya dapat berjumpa dengan kawan baru.
Saya rasa tak sunyi.
Kami banyak belajar cara mengurus diri dengan baik dan dibantu oleh semua.
Terima kasih UiTM kerana telah menjaga makan, minum dan kebajikan para pelajar UiTM yang tinggal di kolej sepanjang tempoh PKP dilaksanakan.
Terima kasih UiTM kerana menjaga kebajikan para pelajar sepanjang tempoh PKP dilaksanakan di kolej.
Sepanjang saya di sini, saya berasa baik dan tenang. Tiada apa yang mengawali promosi saya dan saya dapat belajar dengan tenang.
Saya akan mengingat jasa tuan-tuan, puan-puan sampai bila-bila.
Terima kasih UiTM. Terima kasih UiTM. UiTM di hatiku.
Terima kasih UiTM.
Terima kasih UiTM. UiTM di hatiku.
Kami perlu mendengar arahan daripada pihak UiTM kerana mereka akan merancang perjalanan kami supaya tidak menjadi kluster yang terbesar melakukan pergerakan di luar sana.
Wow, that was a lot of information, wasn't it? Now, let's jump into the fifth phase. What is Conditional Movement Control Order, or for short CMCO? Let me explain. This phase happened on 4th May until 11 May 2020. Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin has announced that the government will enforce a Conditional Movement Control Order beginning 4th May to ease the partial lockdown implemented in March to contain the COVID-19 pandemic. There are a few prohibited activities during this phase. Firstly, employees in both private and public sector will have to work from home, including management and supervisory level. Face-to-face meetings are discouraged. Secondly, recreation is prohibited, including nightclubs, pubs, theme parks, indoor playground, and cinemas. Cultural activities such as Friday prayers can resume with a maximum of 50 members of the congregation depending on the size of the mosque. Almost all economic sectors will be allowed to open with conditions. This is very important as business and work is a source of income to citizens. Besides that, the sector that operate must adhere to standard operating procedures set by the authorities. Last but not least, the government enforces rule that only 4 people maximum in a private vehicle and it must be from the same family, and all public transport can operate with maximum 2 passengers in each car.
Next, I will explain the sixth phase. The Conditional Movement Control Order CMCO was extended for another 4 weeks from 12 May until 9 June. During this phase, mass movement are not allowed, including for major festivals such as Hari Raya Aidilfitri, Keamatan and Hari Gawai. Can you imagine how upsetting it was since it was not as festive as it used to be as people were required to stay at home during the rainy season? People could not go out to visit relatives and friends, and the kids were sad because they could not receive any duit raya. Poor them. In a nutshell, any changes to the SOP or list sectors which will be announced from time to time. Okay, let's hop on to the next phase, which is the seventh phase. But first, let me explain what the Recovery Movement Control Order is. On August 28, 2020, our Prime Minister Yang Amat Berhormat Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin introduced the Recovery Movement Control Order, or more known as RMCO, which he announced to be extended from 10th of June until 31st August 2020. You must have thought, what will be restriction be given from the government this time? For additional information, these are some prohibited activities under RMCO. The first one, interstate travels are not allowed. However, inter-district travel within the state are allowed under the RMCO. Second, international travel is not permitted as Malaysian border remain closed. The third one, activities that involve in pub, nightclub, theme parks, mass religion gatherings or mass social gatherings are strictly prohibited. Other than that, anything regarding religious procession and feasts are also not allowed. Number 5, the prohibitions of sport, competitions or games that require mass gathering of supporters in stadium. Number 6, any measure required by the Health Director General as part of Malaysian effort to contain COVID-19, such as activity that involve crowd together in numbers that are harmful to safe social distancing are not allowed.
So, back to phase number 7. As mentioned before, the interstate was allowed starting June 10th under RMCO, except in areas that are still under the Enhanced Movement Control Order, or EMCO, that will be later explained by Azwin. Besides that, do you know that the return of Malaysians and foreigners from abroad will no longer be confined at any Gazette centres? What it means by Gazette centres is hotel, which are commonly used for people that need to quarantine themselves. What they need to do is only download an application called My Sejahtera on each of the individual's phone. You must have thought, what are the functions of My Sejahtera app? Is it effective enough? Okay, don't worry. We will briefly explain to our admissions friend about what My Sejahtera is all about. My Sejahtera app is an application developed by the government of Malaysia to assist in managing the COVID-19 outbreaks in the country. It allows users to perform health self-assessment and monitor their health progress not only on themselves, but their families too. What is more interesting, it enables the Ministry of Health to monitor users' health condition and take immediate action in providing the treatment required. When a premise is detected with a positive case, the app will inform those who registered under it to do a COVID-19 test. So, for those who are suspected with positive of COVID-19 case, they will be sent to a nearby hospital immediately to get whatever treatment needed. However, it is not an exception for those who get the negative results, because they still need to undergo a 14-day quarantine in their respective home. Both foreigners and Malaysians involved will be issued a wristband specifically made easy to identify and monitored by the authorities throughout their 14-day of quarantine. Next, we look at Phase 8. Before this, the RMCO is supposed to apply in all states from 1st September until 31st December 2020. However, due to the increasing cases and spread of COVID-19, an announcement has been made by the Senior Minister, Security Cluster, Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob on 12 October pertaining the CMCO enforcement in Selangor, Kuala Lumpur and Putrajaya starting from October 14th until October 27th. Later, it is extended until 6 December 2020 and same goes to other states, but only the enforcement date differs. For example, Kedah, Penang, Perak, Negeri Sembilan, Melaka, Johor and Terengganu start on 9 November. On the other hand, Sabah on 13 October and lastly Labuan on 17 October. Okay, that's all from me now. It's time for Azwin to take over.
Wow, that was quite an interesting phase that my fellow friend had presented just now. However, there are another 3 types of quarantine, which are Enhanced Movement Control Order known as EMCO. There are only a few places that enforce this phase. Firstly, Simpang Renggam Village that occurred on 27 March until 9 April. Then, it was extended twice until 28 April. Next, second place that enforced EMCO is Sungai Lui Village, which occurred on 30 March until 13 April. But for Tahfiz School, 23 other houses were extended twice until 5th May. Lastly, Menara City 1 is also under EMCO. The EMCO period is from 31st March until 28 April. What happened during EMCO? Well, let me tell you. Firstly, there was door-to-door tracing for COVID-19. Next, all exit and entry points closed off and business activities are not allowed. Police, armed forces, civil defence and RELA are personally present. Food supplied by the Social Welfare Department. And last but not least, essential stores can open. Targeted Enhanced Movement Control Order known as CMCO. This is when all social activities are prohibited. For instance, clubs, cinemas and events. Screening, testing and quarantine are mandatory for all residents of the areas. They need to stay up to 28 days. Therefore, they cannot go outside from the premise. Only those providing essential services are allowed to go outside, which are the head of the family. There are 4 districts in Sabah that enforce CMCO, such as Lahad Datu, Tawau, Una and Semporna. And yes, you need to stay in house for a month. Administrative Enhanced Movement Control Order known as AEMCO. For emergency information, Administrative Enhanced Mover Control Order, or known as EMCO, is another subtype of EMCO, which apply to specific high-risk area but with fewer restrictions. Residents who live in such areas are allowed to travel within and beyond the affected area, and only if subjected to clearance by the official station there. Similar to EMCO area, compulsory COVID-19 screening and testing applies to all residents. Differently from the EMCO order, all food and essential services in the EMCO area can operate as usual. Do note that all movement orders are officially gazetted under the Prevention and Control Infectious Disease Act 1988 and Police Act 1967. Therefore, anyone who is caught floating in the order may be fined, jailed, or both. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The admission will have another mission. Bye!